Think of the villains of Transformer and you just remember the existential threat the Decepticons pose to the Autobots and humanity. From the different comics, cartoon shows, and movies, we've seen what they are capable of. Leading the path for them was none other than Megatron, and he did so for decades. One of the greatest sci-fi villains of all time, his name itself brands him as a force to be feared by the Autobots. But what if I told you that there's another bot who deserves the throne Megatron is seated on, and someone more deserving of the title of Most Dangerous Decepticon, perhaps? Well, today I bring to you the name of someone who I think should have been running things from day one. Here is Shockwave. Shockwave is the answer to the questions above. A purple steel body with a single yellow optic, a cannon for an arm, and a devastating claw for another. This is someone unlike Megatron in so many ways. He's calculating, bold, and remorseless. You'll get a gist of what I'm talking about when you hear his motto, which is clarity of thought before rashness of action. This is who he is, and this is what he does. Today's video is going to be about 5 instances where Shockwave proved that he was better than Megatron and should have been the leader of the Decepticons. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. There's so much in Shockwave's story about his character, as well as his journey, that is worth talking about. And we're going to start right away with our first major moment, this one coming from the Marvel Comics run. The first coup. The moment I'm talking about can be explained in the simplest possible manner like this. Shockwave awakens on Earth, goes on to destroy every active Autobot at the Ark, and strips Megatron of command. All of this happens during one devastating attack and its immediate aftermath. And funnily, that could be it. But it's the way these events unfolded and the sheer manner in which Shockwave went about his mission that is worth talking more about. For historical context, the Ark crashed on Earth 4 million years ago, and Megatron, as well as the Autobots, went dormant inside. The ship sat in a volcano with its crew deactivated and completely oblivious to the world outside. Shockwave, however, had also traveled to prehistoric Earth after detecting the Ark. The Ark's computer created the Dinobots specifically to stop him, and their battle ended with Shockwave and the Dinobots buried beneath the ground for millions of years. In the modern era, Shockwave was accidentally reawakened by an Autobot probe. By that point, the Autobots and Decepticons had already awakened and resumed their war. Shockwave did not simply find a sleeping Megatron and a ship filled with untouched, deactivated bodies. He arrived at the Ark immediately after the Autobots had defeated the Decepticons using fuel that Sparkplug Witwicky had secretly poisoned. The Autobots were active but badly weakened and damaged by their recent battle. There wasn't the kind of grand, evenly matched battle Shockwave might otherwise have faced, but that didn't stop him. He proceeded to attack the weakened Autobots and still managed to defeat every single one of them. We see his menace when he later hangs the defeated Autobots from the ceiling of the Ark like mementos. Shockwave also removed Optimus Prime's head from his body, but his purpose was not simply to display a trophy. He intended to access the creation matrix inside Optimus and use its power to create a new generation of Decepticons. He then turned to the other Decepticons and announced that Megatron's failures proved that a more logical commander was required. Shockwave repaired and reactivated the injured Decepticons and declared himself Decepticon Commander Supreme. It is too strong to say that every Decepticon immediately pledged enthusiastic allegiance because Shockwave had fairly achieved their collective goals. His takeover was imposed while Megatron was damaged and unable to stop him, although the other Decepticons did accept Shockwave's authority rather than immediately risking themselves to restore Megatron. And just like that, Shockwave took the commander seat. One interesting aspect of this is how Megatron lost his leadership position to someone whose immediate performance seemed to have overshadowed him. Megatron's recent attempt to destroy the Autobots had failed because Sparkplug sabotaged the Decepticons' fuel, while Shockwave arrived moments later and overwhelmed the already weakened Autobots. Keep in mind that Megatron had also been chasing the Autobots through deep space and once caused the Ark to crash so badly that both factions remained offline for 4 million years. Meanwhile, Shockwave had tracked the Ark in prehistoric times, survived his battle with the Dinobots, reawakened, attacked the Ark, defeated its damaged defenders, and immediately developed a plan to exploit Optimus Prime's creation matrix. After all of this, were you really not expecting him to also take over the commander's seat? Shockwave won the first political comparison between himself and Megatron before the latter had fully recovered from the damage he had recently suffered. The power struggle. We move to the very next issue after our first entry from the same run, and this time, we've got what we really lacked in the previous one. It's a confrontation. In issue number 6, we see Megatron left furious and humiliated after the events of issue number 5, as he breaks himself free and goes on to directly challenge Shockwave to reclaim his throne. This leads to a brutal fight between the two, and I couldn't possibly recommend reading this part in the comics more. It's visually so intense, and the battle was considered strong enough to make the issue's cover itself. At one point during the fight, Megatron gains a serious upper hand when he hits Shockwave so hard that he crashes out of the Ark entirely. That is insane just to describe, I know. But eventually, the fight ends with Shockwave emerging victorious. However, an important piece of context is that Megatron had not fully recovered from his earlier injuries. Shockwave recognized that Megatron's body was still damaged, and Megatron's condition left him vulnerable during the confrontation. Therefore, the battle proves that Shockwave was capable of defeating and deposing Megatron under those circumstances. It does not establish beyond all doubt that Shockwave would defeat a fully repaired Megatron in every fair confrontation. Even without the battle, it felt like a difficult cause for Megatron because the rest of the Decepticons had already accepted Shockwave's authority. So, in a way, you can say that in issue number 5, Shockwave politically trumped Megatron by taking control of the Ark, restoring the other Decepticons, and presenting a new plan. In issue number 6, the two properly brawled to decide who would command them, which resulted in a Shockwave triumph as well. This issue again circles back to Megatron's ego making decisions for him, and this time, it gladly bit him back. The challenge to fight Shockwave was entirely driven by Megatron's need to reclaim his authority, and given his damaged condition, it was extremely reckless. Megatron had no careful strategy or recovery plan, nor did he have any guarantee that the other Decepticons would interfere on his behalf. He simply could not live with the fact that Shockwave had taken his position and presented himself as a more capable commander. On the other hand, this issue further proves why Shockwave is so different from him. He believes that his right to authority should be determined through logic and demonstrated ability, yet his willingness to accept Megatron's challenge was not an act of generosity. It was a means of permanently settling the dispute and proving that Megatron could no longer enforce his claim. And we all know who won this battle. This also makes me think of the styles of maintaining authority that we could study from issue number 6. Megatron traditionally ruled his faction with an iron fist. Fear and intimidation was control to his command structure. But the second someone capable and ruthless like Shockwave seized control while Megatron was weakened, that structure failed to protect Megatron's position. It's a very political transition of power, although it would be inaccurate to describe it as the Decepticons freely electing Shockwave through pure logic. Most of them submitted to whichever leader could command the Ark, repair them, provide energy, and punish disobedience. And why wouldn't they initially comply? Shockwave had defeated the Autobots, repaired the Decepticons, taken their base, and developed a strategy involving the creation matrix. He appeared to be a better strategist and more capable commander at that particular moment. Fear cannot guarantee loyalty as much as proving your competence can. And what better example of that than this issue? 4 million years of duty. Shockwave guards Cybertron alone. 1984 Generation 1 animated continuity. We move away from Marvel Comics for this next entry and enter the continuity of the original Generation 1 animated series. Remember in the beginning when I mentioned the whole lore of Megatron chasing the Autobots through deep space and then causing the Ark to crash on Earth, followed by 4 million years of no contact with those forces? Well, during all of this, you have to think of Shockwave. He was left behind on Cybertron when Megatron boarded the Nemesis to pursue the Autobots. Megatron appointed Shockwave to guard Cybertron until his return. Despite having its leader and many important soldiers gone, the Decepticon presence on the planet survived, and the credit for maintaining that position goes in significant part to Shockwave. Just imagine, 4 million years. That's a duration only capable of being imagined by us. Ridiculously high numbers of civilizations and different living species rose and fell during that time on Earth. Species went extinct and land masses changed shapes and sizes. But in the midst of all this stood Shockwave on Cybertron, waiting for Megatron's return and carrying out the assignment he had been given. Mind you, this was someone who didn't have the charisma or reputation that Megatron carried, and yet it's again all about his commitment to his assigned duty. However, the cartoon provides almost no detailed information about how Cybertron was governed during every one of those 4 million years. It would therefore be an exaggeration to say that Shockwave independently maintained a prosperous Decepticon empire, turned the planet around, or ruled it successfully without interruption. The cartoon shows Cybertron as an energy-starved and war-damaged planet, and Shockwave remains loyal to Megatron rather than claiming that Megatron's absence gives him the right to permanent leadership. Now, we all know how Megatron's Earth mission initially turned out, and it's interesting to compare his journey with Shockwave's simultaneously. That leads me to making the third point for considering Shockwave over Megatron, which is reliability. Megatron disappeared for 4 million years because both factions were trapped offline aboard the Ark. Shockwave, meanwhile, remained at his post and continued guarding Cybertron. The comparison is not quite a leader who carelessly abandoned his company versus an interim CEO who made it profitable for 4 million years. Megatron did not intend to disappear, and the series never proves that Shockwave transformed Cybertron into a thriving empire. A more accurate corporate comparison would be a CEO who vanished after a catastrophic expedition and an appointed regional commander who remained at headquarters, followed the last available order, and kept the organization functioning in some form until contact was restored. 4 million years, yes. I know that still sounds absurd, doesn't it? Shockwave proved that he could maintain discipline, survive an unimaginable period of isolation, and carry out a standing assignment with extraordinary persistence. He did not necessarily prove that he could achieve Megatron's goals better in every area. In the G1 cartoon, Shockwave remained one of Megatron's most loyal commanders and did not openly attempt to replace him. Nevertheless, if reliability, patience, and dedication to Cybertron are leadership requirements, then Shockwave's 4 million year watch gives him a powerful argument. The Predacon Project, Transformers Prime, Season 3, Beast Hunters. Let's get to the classic Transformers Prime to pull up a point to make my case. I want to take you to Season 3 here, when Megatron had been fighting the Autobots on Earth for a considerable period and had repeatedly failed to achieve a decisive victory. The war was dragging on, although the Decepticons began Season 3 from a position of considerable strength after destroying the Autobot base and establishing Darkmount. And guess who emerged as one of their greatest scientific assets? Of course, it had to be Shockwave. Shockwave had previously been shown in a Season 2 flashback operating on Cybertron, where he encountered RC and Cliffjumper. He was not an entirely unknown figure who suddenly appeared from nowhere in Season 3. But what he brought with him was fascinating. Shockwave had used recovered Predacon genetic material to create Predacon through cloning. Under Megatron's orders, the Decepticons later expanded this work into Project Predacon, a plan to locate fossilized Predacon remains on Earth and clone an army of ancient Cybertronian beasts. This was meant to give the Decepticons an overwhelming military advantage. Megatron was impressed by the results of Shockwave's work, and Shockwave got right into the mission without wasting time. He meant business and was determined to help the Decepticons win. The Predacon clone Predacon single-handedly posed a major threat to the Autobots and proved powerful enough to challenge several opponents. However, it would be an exaggeration to say that he posed a greater threat than all of Megatron's soldiers combined. Predacon's increasing intelligence also created a new danger. Once Megatron realized that the Predacons could become intelligent, organized beings rather than obedient animals, he feared that an entire Predacon army could turn against him. Megatron therefore ordered the termination of the other clones and manipulated Predacon into believing that the Autobots had destroyed him. But this strategic contribution is not a one-off instance in Transformers Prime. Megatron frequently relied on ancient relics, dark energon, and direct military attacks. Shockwave, meanwhile, contributed through scientific research and developed an entirely new category of warrior. The habit of refusing to listen to anybody but himself often contributed to Megatron's problems. Shockwave, on the other hand, did much of the scientific heavy lifting himself. He studied the fossilized remains, reconstructed Predacon biology, and successfully created a living warrior from extinct genetic material. The Predacon project in general was a major showcase of Shockwave's abilities, and it led to a series of massive changes within the Decepticon campaign. However, this project does not prove that the faction accepted Shockwave as its leader over Megatron. Shockwave conducted his research under Megatron's command, remained publicly loyal, and never assumed control of the Decepticons during the series. The Decepticons also never pledged allegiance to him as a replacement leader. What this example proves is that Shockwave repeatedly generated solutions and weapons that Megatron could not have created himself. His scientific contribution was so important that even Megatron depended on him. He finds solutions, gets results, and provides the Decepticons with tools capable of transforming the war. Whether that automatically makes him the better overall leader is debatable, but it certainly makes him one of the most valuable Decepticons in the entire Prime continuity. The Cosmic Checkmate, IDW Spotlight, Shockwave, and the Regenesis Arc, 2006 to 2018. The final entrant today has to be the most ambitious one, so that's why I pulled one from the classic IDW continuity. Arguably the most sophisticated lore for a Transformers run, this one had Shockwave begin as a senator in Cybertron's government. An intellectual and politically active version of him was a really interesting interpretation, but soon enough he was arrested because his activities, teachings, and opposition threatened the corrupt Senate. This led to him being subjected to procedures called impurita and shadowplay. Impurita physically mutilated him, replacing his face and hands with the single optic and claws associated with his later appearance. Shadowplay rewrote his personality and removed his capacity for emotion. It was effectively forced physical mutilation and neurological reprogramming. However, the procedure did not simply turn him into a loyal killing machine programmed to preserve Cybertron. Shockwave already feared for Cybertron's future and pursued scientific solutions before his punishment. The removal of his emotions stripped away his empathy and moral restraint, allowing that mission to become increasingly monstrous. What followed was a radically destructive transformation within him, where he eventually viewed almost every life outside Cybertron as expendable if sacrificing it could preserve his planet. It's truly a tragic turn of events for Shockwave, from who he was presented to us as at the beginning of this run and what he became later on. To go ahead from here in this series, we have to go back approximately 650,000 years before the modern storyline. Shockwave had foreseen that Cybertron's energy resources would eventually fail and that the planet itself could die. The conflict between Autobots and Decepticons later made that energy crisis even worse, but Shockwave began planning before the war had developed into its familiar final form, and he couldn't have been more right about Cybertron's vulnerability. As a result, without telling most other Cybertronians, he acted upon this prediction and launched the Regenesis Project. Here he created 13 different forms of energon-derived ore and seeded them across numerous planets. Each ore possessed a different property, and Shockwave intended to combine their effects in the distant future. The original purpose included producing new energy and ensuring Cybertron's continued survival. But over hundreds of thousands of years, the plan expanded into something vastly more destructive than merely storing raw energon for later harvesting. The sheer scale required to execute a plan like this was insane, as it unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. Back in the modern IDW timeline, the difference between Megatron and Shockwave is clear. However, it would be inaccurate to say that Megatron was only fighting over the single planet Earth. IDW Megatron led a galaxy-spanning Decepticon movement, conquered or destabilized multiple worlds, and fought a war that spread far beyond Earth. Meanwhile, Shockwave's focus was the survival and supremacy of Cybertron, but his final plan threatened the entire universe. During Dark Cybertron, Shockwave attempted to combine the powers of the Regenesis ores, the Dead Universe, and temporal technology. His plan would collapse spacetime into a singularity, consume the universe's energy, and channel that power into Cybertron. Therefore, he was not fighting for the peaceful survival of every Cybertronian across different galaxies. He was willing to destroy virtually everything else and even sacrifice Cybertronians if his calculations required it. His ideology was to put Cybertron first at a cosmic and horrifying scale. Shockwave also didn't share the exact objectives Megatron did, or at least prioritize them in the same manner. He didn't primarily care about defeating Optimus Prime or ruling Earth. His central priority was to ensure that Cybertron survived according to his definition of survival. And while Megatron was their leader by title, Shockwave's actions operated on a time scale and cosmic level that even Megatron had not fully anticipated. However, those actions would not necessarily make the Decepticon population willingly choose Shockwave. His plan used friends and enemies alike as expendable components and nearly erased existence itself. Shockwave's vision in this continuity also carried him through time. After Dark Cybertron, temporal forces displaced him into Cybertron's distant past. There he encountered and murdered the original Onyx Prime, took his identity, and manipulated ancient history as Onyx. This means that he did not merely impersonate an already established Onyx in the present. He became the figure history remembered as Onyx Prime and helped engineer events surrounding the rise of the 13. Looking at the scale of these achievements, there's nobody in the Decepticon faction who comes close to having a legacy quite like Shockwave. All of these points suggest different scenarios and moments where Shockwave one-ups Megatron, and that too in different aspects, such as gaining a political advantage, emerging as the winner in a physical battle under favorable circumstances, creating civilization-changing scientific plans, and manipulating Cybertronian history itself. In fact, Shockwave didn't always need a direct battle against Megatron. His actions and his vision made him one of the most powerful independent forces in Cybertronian history. But IDW also demonstrates while placing him in permanent command could be catastrophic. Shockwave's logic was so detached from morality that he was prepared to destroy the universe in order to preserve Cybertron. All in all, looking back, we see Shockwave as a champion of logic more than anything. His home is something he believes he needs to protect, and he does so. His kind should back their leader Megatron during battles, and in several continuities he does support him. And when he believes that their leader has failed and that the Decepticons require a better commander, some versions of Shockwave deal with it themselves. That's the logical, rational side of him that acts as the backbone of his character. He's also devoid of much emotion in several continuities. In IDW, the one time he possessed an ordinary emotional range, he underwent the Shadowplay procedure and had it forcibly taken away from him. But this did not simply improve his personality or make every decision more rational. It removed empathy, compassion, and moral restraint, allowing his decisions to become more extreme. He chased objectives relentlessly, with little to no regard for the moral consequences surrounding them. If anything, he began to perceive emotions as areas of vulnerability and obstacles in the path of advancement. All of this makes him a science buff too, since being objective and not allowing feelings to dictate decisions often goes hand in hand with his scientific pursuits. His research, studies, and plans all come from his scientific background, be it his analysis of the Ark and Creation Matrix, the Predacon project, or the Regenesis program. They are all results of his extraordinary mastery in the field of science. All that being said, Shockwave is a legend, nothing short of the title, if not something more. His character, his actions, and his vision spoke more than he did, and to me they proved that he possessed qualities Megatron frequently lacked. Whether that means he would have been a better permanent leader is complicated. Shockwave could be more patient, intelligent, and scientifically productive, but his lack of empathy also made him capable of sacrificing his own allies, Cybertron, and the entire universe for an equation. And maybe the Autobots would not have rejoiced after all, knowing that the greatest threat among the Decepticons was no longer the enemy they had locked horns with for the longest time, but a strategist whose plans could unfold for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's our video for today. If you enjoyed this one, drop a like on it and share it with your friends. And let me end with this one little question. Do you think that if the Decepticons had followed Shockwave from the very beginning, they would have seen a different story for themselves altogether? Many maybes to reply to this with, I know. But I'll read them all if you drop your answers to this question in the comments section below. Until next time, take care and ciao!